Welcome to the St. Louis Science Center. My name is Al Wyman. I'm Vice President of Public Understanding of Science. What we're having here, and if you've never been to the St. Louis Science Center before for one of these, we call these science cafes. And what we like to do is have an engaging evening where all of those who are in attendance not only have a chance to hear presentations, but to participate and to learn more about science. And we've certainly got an interesting area of science to talk about this evening. And we hope that this is going to be a most engaging evening for all of you that are here. We thank you very much for being here. But most of all, we thank the brains behind this evening. Amy, you come up here. Amy Cami, let's welcome her and say thank you to the lady that's made all of this happen this evening. Our hero.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Tonight is a culmination of an 18-year personal journey that began with a home cassette recording for a family friend going through hospice. It progressed to an anecdotal questionnaire study developed with a music therapist, to an initial brainwave study conducted by Dr. William Collins using the solo harp CD New Love that I recorded for my father. And then that expanded into a research project that was never implemented, but it was the project that led to the formation of the Scientific Arts Foundation. And that led to a second brainwave study using the magic mirror. And it has culminated in the development of our current medically approved holistic clinical trial exploring the impact of specific music on stress factors in adults receiving chemotherapy treatment for cancer. Tonight is the first time members of our research team have presented their pilot study data to the general public. Dr. William Collins, Dr. David Kaiser, Dr. Robert Avery, Dr. Rachel Borson via a DVD, are here to share their individual areas of expertise. And we have the opportunity to see how they will collectively work together to help cancer patients everywhere. The Scientific Arts Foundation has aligned with the following cancer centers as referral sites for our study: the Center for Cancer Care and Research, under the direction of Dr. John Eckhart; the St. Louis Cancer and Breast Institute, under the direction of Dr. Rachel Borson; Missouri Hematology and Oncology Care, under the direction of Dr. Robert Avery. Our clinical trial is for newly diagnosed cancer patients and looks at the whole person, male or female, with any type of cancer, who will be receiving chemotherapy treatment. Our measurements for this clinical trial will include quantitative EEG for brainwaves and neurological function, saliva samples for immune system and stress levels, standardized psychological tests, daily questionnaires to track information such as emotional feelings, appetite, sleep patterns, and perception of their support systems. And our final measurement will explore environmental influences. Each patient will receive one set of measurements prior to beginning chemotherapy, and then again 2 weeks after chemotherapy treatment has started. Their final set of measurements will be 2 weeks later. This will enable us to get baseline measurements before any chemotherapy drugs enter their body. Our goal for this research is to learn how the stress of chemotherapy treatment affects a cancer patient's mind, body, sense of well-being, and how specific music could help. At this point, I would like to show a brief statement by Dr. Rachel Borson from the St. Louis Cancer and Breast Institute.
Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Rachel Borson and I'm a medical oncologist. I practice in a private practice that specializes in breast cancer, and I'm very excited to be here and speak with you about a very important research study that I'm committed to seeing through with my collaborators. One of the biggest issues that we're seeing is that women who have had breast cancer are doing much better overall in terms of how things go with the cancer. But the biggest issue is quality of life after treatment, during treatment, and whether or not people can get back to their lives, the same people that they were. One of the things that's very commonly spoken about is the stress, the tremendous stress, physically and emotionally, of going through chemotherapy. People are very afraid of having to need chemotherapy and very afraid of what they'll feel like as they go through it. Another area I hear a lot about is whether or not such a thing as Chemo Brain actually exists, and I'm absolutely persuaded, as are my patients, that it does. We know from certain studies that some people who have had chemotherapy seem to have a problem with what's called cognitive function, which refers to the ability to learn new information and remember older information. What we know is that going through treatment for cancer, although it may succeed in terms of rendering one cancer-free, may have a cost that's a high cost in terms of human life and human quality of life. The study that we are very excited to open to the St. Louis community is looking to examine if there is a kinder, gentler, better way to treat cancer. It is going to ask the question whether or not certain types of relaxation CDs that utilize music, and a very specific type of music, harp music, will enable some kind of change in the physiological response to stress. What we're looking at is whether or not some of the stress hormones, whether the brain waves that can be recorded with an EEG, and whether the person's own perspective of their own mood and how they're doing can change as a result of very specific music played at the most stressful time of someone's life. We're interested in trying to look at this in a variety of cancer practices, not just breast cancer patients, but I know that my patients would be grateful and excited to participate in this research if it was available to them. I thank you for your attention.
As Dr. Borson stated, Chemo Brain is real. And that is why we have moved forward in developing this research. It's to help the patients and to potentially increase their quality of life. There are many factors that impact our quality of life. Where we live and our environment is one of them. Debra Burnett is a nationally recognized design authority and keynote presenter in the field of epigenetic design. She is recognized as a leading authority in the field of color and light, and is currently a residential spokesperson for the American Society of Interior Designers. Debra Burnett is on our research team as our environmental specialist. Her bioinformation is on the research team information table, but unfortunately she could not be with us tonight due to some unexpected health issues. However, Dr. Robert Avery from Missouri Hematology and Oncology Care, who recently joined our research team as one of our referral sites, is also a specialist in epigenetics. He has graciously agreed to help present Debra's material and share his expertise in this field as well. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Avery, and please would you share with us a little bit about yourself as well, because we want to get to know you too.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Bob Avery, and I'm one of the practicing oncologists in this study. And my group is the Missouri Hematology and Oncology, and my offices are over at St. Mary's Hospital and St. Anthony's Hospital, and also we spent some time down in Festus at Jefferson Memorial. And besides treating patients with cancer, one of my particular interests is in not only epigenetics, but also in how nutrition and what you eat affects epigenetics. I'll give you a quick rundown of that. Epigenetics, as far as nutrition is concerned, is how nutrition or substances in food will affect your genes. Not removing genes or changing what your chromosomes look like, but you have lots of genes in your chromosomes that are there. The majority of them are silent and never exposed or never transcribed. But certain substances can turn genes on or turn genes off. And this is the key to health, but it's also the key to diseases, because you can turn off good genes, like tumor suppressor genes, and get cancers, and you can also turn on bad genes, like oncogenes, and cause cancers. And there's a lot of nice data and research in nutrition, especially whole foods, and which ones are best at turning on good genes and turning off bad genes. So tonight, I am Debra Burnett, and I'm not a interior designer, and if you look at my closet at home, you can figure that out, but I can play one on TV, I guess. So there are 4 facts of life, as you can see here, and life is diurnal in nature. You can look at everything we do, it's a cyclical nature. You have day and you have night, and with the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, rising of the moon, you get these cycles, and our body follows those cycles. And it's rhythmic and it's cyclical, and there's also, what you don't think about, there's an electromagnetic wave to the planet itself. You have, of course, magnetic north. How could you use a compass if you didn't have magnetic north? And all of these forces affect your body and the diurnal rhythms of your body. So just like in the earth, that we have the diurnal rhythm there, it kind of affects us. So the amount of time you spend in sunlight, the amount of time you spend in the darkness has an effect on not only you, but also your health. And that's the thing that specifically she studies, and that's one of the factors we're going to look at in this study as far as the environment and how that affects your stress levels. So light is very important, as you know. And you can, there's not even anything real complicated about this. You can know how you feel during the summertime when the sun comes up at 5 in the morning and stays up till 9 or 10 at night, how you have much more energy. You can get out and you can do things. You can even go out after dinner and take a nice walk at 7 or 8 o'clock at night because the sun is still up, you feel good. But try that, December 15th when, the sun gets up at 7 in the morning and goes down at 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon. Boy, you just can't get up. You just don't feel like it at 7 at night doing anything because, it's dark outside. And your body, you can see, your body really is affected by what's outside and the light and dark cycles that it experiences. And so it's this balance that keeps us in, either a healthy state or a sick state. You have good stress, and you have bad stress or distress. We have to have some stress in our lives. You need to have stress. You get up and you have to walk and you have to exert yourself. There is a good kind of stress that is helpful to you. Anytime you try to learn something, that's actually a good form of stress, because you can, like if you're trying to learn to play the harp, which I tried at one time, it's very difficult at first, but as you learn to play your first song, then it becomes pleasurable. That's a good kind of stress. And then you have the bad sort of stress. You got that nasty old boss that's, really on your tail all the time, and you can't get out of work till 5 o'clock, and you feel like you have no control. That's bad stress, and that actually has a lot of effect on your health. It causes oversecretion of stress hormones. It causes depression of the immune system. These are all well-studied scientific facts. And you need to have a balance. You need to balance good stress and bad stress to remain in a state of health. So the survey that we're going to use is the BLESS survey, the Burnett Limited Environmental Stimuli Survey, and it has 2 parts. One is to describe their listening space, because as you can imagine, the patients will get a CD to listen to. Well, we want to kind of find out what environment or what place they're listening to it, to see if that has an effect on how well this affects their stress levels. And then we're also going to look at photos of the space to get a better picture of where they're listening to this music. And this isn't a way of looking at where you're living. Like, we don't care if you're in a double wide or you're up on a trailer like that, or if you live in a tin hut. We're really just trying to get an idea of the space where you're listening to the music, and kind of put that together in the whole study situation to see what we can measure that affects stress levels. So light, through the survey and through the pictures, there's going to be a measurement of how much natural light is in the living space that the person is living in and listening to the music, and that will give us an idea of how that is affecting their stress levels. And then also the idea of, this almost looks like my, no it doesn't. And the amount of perceived clutter, not actual clutter. We're not trying to take pictures of people's houses and show people, oh, look at how Jane is living. But really, it's the idea of perceived clutter. How orderly is your life, or how disordered is your life, and to see how that plays into your stress levels. And so that's basically it. It's not very complicated, and I think it's a very essential part of this, because we're trying to take general medicine outside of the office where I see people, because the hour or 2 hours that you might spend in the clinic are, there's 22 hours left in the day, and this is to kind of get an idea of the environment that people are living in and see how that also affects their stress levels with or without the harp music. And part of the questionnaire also looks at colors, as you can imagine, and you can use your own cells as your study person. There's certain colors that will make you feel happy or uplifted, and you can tell by being in some places where it's either dark or dingy, you just don't feel good. And that's another part of this study as well, in addition to the light levels, but also colors and how they affect stress. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to do just one short little exercise to expand on this idea of epigenetics and how vibrations in the environment determine whether specific genes in our cells express. Everything is energy. We're all made up of cells, and everything has a vibration or frequency. We can't hear it, but we can feel it, because it's beyond our sense of hearing, but we know what feels good around us. So I just want to do a little exercise. Well, first of all, I have a riddle. This is part of another presentation I do, but it's applicable here because it's all based on vibration. What do we all have, yet most of us are unaware we have one? When we realize we have one, it can impact our life. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to give you the answer. We all have a resonant frequency, or a home frequency. It's the frequency that where we most naturally vibrate or resonate. And it changes all the time. It's not something that you're born with and you just hang on to it forever. Our moods are a good indication as to where we are vibrationally. I mean, watch a little kid and they could be really screaming and mad, so their vibration is woo, and then 2 minutes later they want to come play with you. Well, they've shifted. So you can look at your moods as an indication of where you are vibrationally. Well, everything around us is vibration. So I want to do a little exercise, and on the count of 3, I want everybody to tone an ah. It's not a singing contest, it's just a fun little thing. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Ah. Okay, what happened? What? Everyone went to the same tone. Why? Well, first of all, which tone did you match? Mine. Why? Because I'm the loudest, right? I have the microphone. I have the biggest mouth. But I was the loudest vibration in the room, okay? When you first opened your mouth, you were singing and sharing your home frequency or your resonant frequency. You were like, oh, this is where I am. Okay. But then, how did that feel? It felt kind of like, ew, right? And so you shifted and you changed and you chose mine. Well, how many of you went through the mental process of, oh, I'm resonating at my home frequency, and oh, this doesn't feel very good, and oh, Amy's is the loudest vibration in the room, so I think I'm going to change mine to match hers. We just don't do that. It was unconscious for most people, right? It was an unconscious shift where we are doing that all day long. We are unconsciously shifting and adjusting to vibrations in our environment without even being aware of it. So here's a real life example. You have a great mood. I mean, you're just in a great mood, all right? And by the way, that concept is called forced resonance. But I did a presentation at St. Anthony's and somebody said it's peer pressure. And it's like, I like that because peer pressure indicates that there is a choice. And most of us don't realize that we have a choice, but now you do. All right, so it's definitely peer pressure for you. So here's a real-life example. You're having a great day, your vibration is high, it's just going great, you go into work, you go into the office, and somebody else comes in and they are just having, it's just a low vibration day, all right? Really, yeah, it's really low. Okay, so what are your choices here? What are your choices? What do we normally do? Right, because who has the strongest vibration in this environment? This person. Misery loves company. Great, you've created this resonant system. All right, and it feels good because you're at the same frequency. It's a low frequency, but you still are matching, all right? So now that you know that you have a choice, what's the other option? You can hold yours, make the choice. I'm not going to be impacted by this. I'm very responsible for my energetic well-being, so I'm going to hold it and maybe they'll come up. Or maybe they'll come up a little bit and it'll feel harmonious. Or you could come down a little bit. We have a saying in our house, so take it down a notch. And that's what it means. Come into harmony with it so it doesn't feel so uncomfortable. And the other thing is you can actually leave the room. It's self-care. All right, now these are the concepts that we're working with this research, because the music is an environmental stimuli that is placed in the environment of the patient. And we'll get into a further definition as to how that affects our listening, our energetic system, but that's the idea. It's called, when you put a tuning fork and another tuning fork together, the same frequency, you strike this one. I was going to do the demonstration, but it never works really well, so my kids said, just explain it. You strike it, tune it, put another one at the same frequency right next to it, and it begins to vibrate. That sympathetic vibration, okay? That's what we're working with this study. All right. So our environment also impacts our stress levels. And stress can be measured in a number of ways. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Kaiser, who will share with you information about our saliva sample study data that we've collected.
Okay. Well, I'm about to bring the vibration way down.
Tell us who you are. Tell us who you are.
I'm by training, I'm a pharmacist, pharmacologist, toxicologist. So I thrive on data. So when Amy told me that she was running a study, my ears perked up a little bit, and I thought, I can really contribute to this. So what we basically did was, through an iterative process, we came up with a list of markers, biochemical markers, in saliva to look at, to begin to get an idea if there's something biochemical that this music is affecting in the body. And we did a pilot study. Saliva was chosen for a number of reasons. One principal reason is that it's easy to get, and it's easy to get people to volunteer to give it to you. I mean, a lot of people have an aversion to needles, so the gold standard with the plasma wasn't a real good option, but saliva seemed to be agreeable. So, but there's in my mind a far bigger reason. The dogma about saliva being something that just lubricates our food and helps it get where it needs to go is really changing quite a lot in recent years. There's actually proteins produced and released in the salivary gland that actually go through the gut and signal in the gut. And actually, beyond that, some of these proteins survive the acid environment of the stomach, which previously everybody was more or less assumed that the acid is just going to destroy these proteins. Well, it turns out that they don't for a lot of them, and they get absorbed into the blood and disseminated through the body. So there really is this pathway where the brain, you get a neurosecretory pathway that goes through the salivary gland, into the gut, into the blood, out into the body. So that's about as deep as I wanted to get with it now. I wanted to show you some data, and I wanted to start with this protein called carbonic anhydrase 6. It's also called gustin. There's two divergent lines of literature. Gustin was looked at its trophic ability, and that's basically a growth factor. Carbonic anhydrase actually is an enzyme that mediates ionic balance. But the thing about carbonic anhydrase in the saliva that's very intriguing to me is that it's a zinc binding protein. I've got a real passion for zinc and zinc signaling because it works through over 300 zinc metalloenzymes that affect virtually every aspect of our physiology. So zinc is very important. And what we found out in this pilot study, we looked at these bars correspond to an individual. And what we did was we had the individual suck on a cotton ball to collect saliva and then listen to the magic mirror for 23 minutes and then repeat the cotton ball. And what we found out is that 4 of the 8 people had dramatic increases in one of the forms of this protein. And that's important too, but let me just point this out, the fact that these increases, they look fairly modest, but you have to keep in mind that these are in the same individual. This is each color corresponds, this is the control for this sample. So this change is happening in 23 minutes in one person just as a result of listening to the magic mirror. So I think that that's pretty impressive. Now the other thing that's really intriguing is, you see up here it says non-glycosylated. This is actually the form of the protein that doesn't bind the zinc. The glycosylation is a fancy name for putting a sugar on it. There's a sugar that provides a docking site for the zinc. So we saw these increases in the form that basically shuts the zinc signaling down. What we then did was look at the glycosylated form, which is the one that has the sugar, and guess what? In the same people that it went up in, the one that doesn't bind the zinc, the form that does bind went down. So what this was telling me, suggesting to me, is that in this 23-minute period of listening to the music, there's a substantial change in the level of zinc signaling that's occurring in 4 of the 8 people right at the very end of listening to the music. And to our surprise, we actually looked 24 hours later, and not only was it still there, but the number went up to 6. So there's now, granted, there's that period of 24 hours where other things besides the music was going on, but there is something really intriguing going on here. And I think I better leave it there because I could really, I do have my soapbox outside, so I was and just to round out the picture too. So this is my area of interest, the zinc signaling, but also I also needed to point out to actually acknowledge and thank the contribution of Dr. Abdul Wahid of SLU, who early on with this, when we first thought of doing this, the way that you determine, the way you measure these proteins is by actually getting an antibody that you then blot on a nitrocellulose sheet and actually measure how much of the antibody binds to it. And Dr. Wahid provided the antibodies for this. He's actually a world expert in carbonic anhydrase type 6, and he's actually right here in St. Louis. So that kind of clued me in that we're on the right track here. So, and beyond that, at Dr. Wahid's urging, he also provided other antibodies to start looking at some of these other markers, these biochemical markers for immune function. So we actually then looked at amylase, which is a protein in the saliva, and that's been shown to decrease, actually to increase in stress, so to decrease when stress is alleviated. And we actually did see not quite as robust a response, but we did see some decreases right after the music, and then further decreases at 24 hours later. So that further added a level of confidence to us that we're really looking at something that's more than just chance here. And then we also have some markers of the human immunoglobulins, IgG. This is the, we separated out some of the forms of IgG, but we can see that now this is an antibody that would increase with immune function. You want to actually see a stimulation of IgG as supporting the immune system. And there's some pretty robust increases in that too, although again it's not quite as robust as what we saw with the carbonic anhydrase 6. This is the other chain of IgG. Again, some of the more robust changes occurring at 24 hours out. And then we also looked at IgA. You can see some of the changes, some of the increases occurring in the later time point. And I think that's all we have. Yeah. So that's pretty impressive for a pilot study, I think. So I think that we're in the process of tabulating it. We're not doing statistics. This is another important thing to keep in mind. With this kind of a study, the person is their own control. So we're not doing population statistics, there's a lot of, let me just say it's a different kind of study when you can actually look at the individual and show differences with the person. And I think it actually gives a lot more weight to the data.
It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. William Collins from the Reintegrative Health Institute here in St. Louis. Dr. Collins and his wife, Chris, are one of the main reasons we are here tonight. His willingness to measure the impact of my harp music on brain waves almost 10 years ago led to the development of the Scientific Arts Foundation. He wrote our very first study, which was never implemented, but it paved the way for our current clinical trial. Their dedication to the ideas we are exploring has fueled my belief and persistence in continuing. Dr. Collins' work with brainwave and neurological function is state-of-the-art, and it is an honor to have him conducting our quantitative EEG brainwave measurements and standardized psychological tests for this study. Dr. William Collins is the director of Reintegrative Health Institute in Des Peres. Dr. Collins has been in private practice for 30 years, serving adults and children, and in the past 10 years, he has provided solutions using neurofeedback for ADD, Asperger's, autistic spectrum children, as well as counseling for adults, families, and adolescents. Dr. Collins.
Thank you. One of the things that Rochelle Borson talked about in her video was Chemo Brain. There are two general things that the pilot study that I did using quantitative EEG looked at. One was the direct impact on the brain of both chemotherapy and solo harp music. Two, were there any indications in the quantitative EEG that could be related or were related to stress factors that would then link, to what we're doing in terms of the salivary study? What I want to present is just an overview of some of what was found, which in my opinion is remarkable and leads the way for what this study can really point out in terms of solo harp music and the effects of cancer. As Rochelle Borson talked about, Chemo Brain is one of the significant side effects of chemotherapy. It affects cognitive functions, it affects memory. People feel as if they're in a fog. Years ago, meaning 10 years ago when we started looking at this, there wasn't any research that indicated that this impact, which we call Chemo Brain, lasted much beyond whatever the treatment regimen was. What we now know, and as you notice, this study is recent, is that it goes far beyond, the chemotherapy treatment and has a much wider impact, than was previously even considered. When I look at the pilot study, what I'm going to point out is changes in the QEEG. Quantitative EEG is simply EEG or brainwave activity in a digital form that allows us to put it through a database and look at it compared to a norm. All the data that I'm presenting tonight is compared to a norm. So there are normative databases, just like academics have normative databases. Test a child in St. Louis and compare them to children across the country. We're using a normative database to look at these patients. The rest of the slides are simply going to look at change, and I want to explain just the coloration. Right here is a color scale. And if you can imagine a bell-shaped curve being superimposed on that scale, as you go from green either out to orange and red or down to blue and dark blue, you're going 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations from the norm. That's not really important, other than red that you see here is a significant deviance from the norm. This is pre, this is post. And each one of these slides I'll go through. The significance of that related to Chemo Brain, I think, particularly if we can replicate this in a larger study, will have a tremendous impact, on cancer, cancer treatment, cancer research, cancer outcome. Because what this pilot study is showing is the exact opposite of what you would expect after a regimen of chemotherapy. Chemo Brain would indicate that a patient after a regimen of chemotherapy would have greater cognitive deficits. Or in other words, when we look at our schema here, it would be more red across more areas of the cortex. We're not only not seeing an increase, we're seeing a decrease. Now, the only thing that's different between this and that is the patient listens to solo harp music. So I want to emphasize this point because it's critical. Normal treatment of chemotherapy would result in a decrease in cognitive functions. We are seeing no decrease. We're in fact seeing an increase in cognitive processing relative to the patient starting out before chemotherapy. So again, they're actually, when you look at quantitative EEG, they're actually improving. This is another looking at pre and post. The difference in all of these is you're looking at different frequencies. So this is looking at frequency ranges from 0 to, I think, about 30 hertz. And so we're showing in every aspect, of the EEG, from pre to post, we're seeing improvement. This is taking the quantitative EEG and placing it on an MRI template, in which case you can do just like you can an MRI. You can slice right down through the brain. And so you can see, if you look here in the pre, and you look here in the post, you see again a change. Patients improving in neurological functions, even though all the research would show that neurological functioning should decrease. These are just showing that this quantitative EEG put on an MRI template does represent, an actual MRI. So this is how a normal MRI would appear. I just pulled out bits and pieces of it in the previous one. And I'm going to go back and forth. And I'm going to go back and forth a couple times. Look at the red. Whoops. I'll go that way. And so you can see the improvement. This is another measure which is looking at how does a brain communicate across regions of the brain. Where is this? Here, where there are lines, are indications of complications or a decrease in functioning across regions of the brain, pre and then post. This is simply taking the patients and looking at each patient and looking at the red, which shows deviations. And again, all of these subjects are being compared to a normal population. And so we see deviations pre, and then we see changes post. Now, if you just look at red pre, green post, you see changes in each patient. What we're hoping to do in terms of the full study, because it will be a significant study with a very large population, that we will be able to separate into 2 treatment groups and 1 control group. And in terms of quantitative EEG, we'll be able to take all that subject data and we'll compare it to a norm. We're hoping to be able to replicate this, because if we can replicate this, we have certain indications. I didn't talk much about stress because that was already talked about. We have indications of what can be done relative to stress. We have indications of what can be done that Dr. Borson mentioned relative to the quality of life of a patient going through chemotherapy. If you've ever known anybody who's gone through chemotherapy, they describe it as a very unpleasant process. We hope to show that not only can we improve the quality of life, but we can do something significantly productive in terms of this whole idea of Chemo Brain. Most research that you look at in terms of Chemo Brain, we know it happens. Nobody really knows why it happens. We know what happens because we can measure what happens, but there's a possibility, not directly as a result of what we do with this study, but indirectly as a result of inferences from the study, we may be able to pose some questions about what is really causing this for future studies, to then isolate that and look at it. That's pretty much my part of it, which is looking at quantitative EEG. And again, if you have any questions, I'll answer at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty amazing. And I would just like to clarify that for the quantitative EEG pilot study, the pre-measurements were taken, and then each subject was given the magic mirror, and they listened to it once a day for 10 days. And they came back and had their second quantitative EEG done. So those changes occurred during that 10-day period. Just listening to this CD, it's 23 minutes. Once a day for 10 days elicited those changes. I would like to now read a statement by Stephen Halpern. He's a pioneer in the field of intentional and relaxation music. His CDs have been used around the world for over 30 years. We are honored to have him as part of our research team. We will be using 23 minutes of his solo piano CD, Comfort Zone, as music for our second group of patients. So here are his thoughts that he wanted me to share tonight. Reflections on composing healing music. Of the many factors determining how effective a particular selection of music will be for a wide range of audience, the least understood and typically ignored factor is that of the intention of the composer-performer. Although it's impossible to put a quantifiable percentage on the impact of intention versus rhythm, melody, harmony, and tone color, my research and experience over 35 years confirms its importance. Music is a carrier wave of consciousness, has been a phrase I've used to describe part of my composing process. Recently, quantum physics has confirmed the viability and measurability of this subtle energy. What it means is that it's not just the notes that someone plays, but the energy that comes through as well. When I began my work, I disagreed with the traditional dogma in the field of music therapy that held that only music of a particular classical compositional structure could effectively evoke a relaxation response in the listener. My early research proved that position was erroneous. In fact, my original composition evoked far deeper relaxation among a much higher percentage of listening subjects. 35 years later, the experience of millions of people attests to the need to expand the world of healing music to include non-traditional approaches to composition that incorporate flow and a less structured, less left-brain intellectual approach. This is what I have always included in my recordings, and it is one of the reasons so many people are successfully able to relax when they listen. By not presenting the listener with the familiar stimuli of predictable melodies and chord progressions, the listener is encouraged to be in the present moment. All relaxation and healing occurs in the now. Best-selling books and ancient spiritual traditions agree on this point. I believe that the music that Amy and I compose create a field effect that effectively engages and evokes the relaxation response. This, in turn, enables and supports the self-healing energies and innate intelligence of the listener. Rather than merely reframing music that was composed 200 years ago for a very different world, our contemporary compositions show the great potential for this ancient healing art form, music. Stephen Halpern. All right. I'll skip this part because of time. Huh? Do you want to see one more visual of that, of what I really think is going on with this? Do you? Okay. All right. A couple of years ago, I was asked to speak to a hospice caregivers group in New Jersey. And my son, Justin, at the time, it was a couple of years ago, said, "Mommy, I need to draw you a picture. I need to draw you a picture." All right, can we put it up? And that's what he drew. And I asked him, I said, "Justin, what's that?" The second. He goes, "Well, that's the Rainbow Pyramid." It's like, duh. And it's like, wow, we are the Rainbow Pyramid. We have all of these vibrations and all of these colors inside of us. And since everything in life is vibrational, you know, sometimes we have experiences that just hit us and we can't assimilate it into our energetic field. And so they get squished and they get squashed. So like my brain, or somebody says, "You shouldn't be doing that," or "You shouldn't have that dream," or "You shouldn't want to do blah, 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 blah." And all these colors get squashed in our rainbow pyramid. Because how I interpret this is, I go backwards. When you live from your heart, and the smiley faces for me, I interpret without any fear or with joy, and you embrace all the colors of the rainbow pyramid, then you come into balance. And so what I really believe is happening with this music, And I'll give you just a little insight as far as how the magic mirror came. My husband showed me some ancient healing chants, and I heard music. And this music possessed me. This music was in my head all the time. And I knew I couldn't write it down, because if I wrote down the music, I would freeze the energy of that music into a note. And then it would be played the same way all the time. But I wasn't playing it the same way all the time. I was playing it differently every time I sat down at the harp. So I had to go into the recording studio, and I had to just be as clear as possible. And like Stephen Halpern says, music is a carrier wave of consciousness. So I'm speaking from the artist's perspective now. I know what that music felt like when it came through me and came out of me. And it is the highest vibrational music I have ever recorded. And there was no intention, there was no connection to the outcome. I just had to get it out. So remember those tuning forks? You strike one tuning fork of a frequency and you put another one next to it. Well, the frequency that is flowing through that music, because for me the music is the highway. The notes, the music is the highway, and the information in the quantum world, the information travels on that sound wave and enters that rainbow pyramid, that energetic place, our energetic space. And that vibration that is entering it is a high vibration of love. And guess what? We all have that vibration inside of us, but we don't live from that place all the time. We forget that we have that kind of vibration inside of us. But when we sit down and when we listen to this music and we allow that music and that information to come into our space, guess what? We have it in us. So it sympathetically resonates that high vibration within us. And as it wakes up in me, it totally balances and rebalances my whole energetic system. And that is the only way I can explain the results from the quantitative EEG, because every woman received exactly what she needed. Because we're all different. But if the highway's clear, the information can travel on it. This study is cutting edge. This study is created itself. It is something that I have been living with for the last 18 years. And this is like its presentation. It's 18 years old. It's an adult now. And it's not for me. It's not for Stephen Halpern. It has nothing to do with our music. It has to do with the way that music was created. It has to do with the way that music was, that creative expression was allowed to flow through us. That is the fundamental philosophy of the Scientific Arts Foundation. It is the value of creative expression. Some creative expressions want to be created from the mind, and those are the ones that we create. Other creative expressions want to be created through us and from the innermost part of us. And those are the kind of creations that are healing, that help balance the observer. It won't just be music. This is just the beginning. Dance, drawings, cooking, gardening, any kind of art form. We all have these gifts inside of us. Can you imagine a world where everybody was sharing those gifts? That's a lot of love. So this study is ready to go. And now we need the funding to support it. The total cost for this research is $320,000, which is not a lot of money when you consider how much information that we will gather. This whole study has evolved on its own, one connection at a time, one relationship at a time. And that is how we will find its financial supporters. One person at a time, sharing with another person. Our intention is to increase the community's awareness about this research, so eventually the people who can financially support it will hear about it from a friend or a colleague or a family member. I would like to once again thank our presenters, Dr. Avery, Dr. Collins and Dr. Kaiser, Al Wyman and Margie Walsh and the St. Louis Science Center, Whole Foods, Metropolitan Confections, our board of directors, and our research team. I thank you all for being here tonight, and the floor is now open for questioning.